this is Cal Lemons, and this is 9 tips for writing. And we're going to talk today about all the different ways to, take your writing to the next level in your book, your theme copy, your stories, and your captions. So let's get started. So when we talk about writing, I kind of get sad sometimes because we focus so much on coverage and design and the look of the book and the theme, and I think the writing gets missed, and that's really sad. Writing's often overlooked, but that verbal aspect is so important to our books, and so we really need to do a good job on that. And I think the key to strong writing is it has to be substantial, and it has to be authentic, and it needs to be journalistic, and then it absolutely has to connect to the ear. So those are the things that we're going to talk about today, and I have them put into 9 tips for you. So let's get started. So tip number 1, write less theme copy. So the old adage is true, less is more. If your theme copy looks like an English essay, then it's probably too much theme copy. And I challenge you to go back and look at last year's book and look at how much theme copy did you write, and maybe ask some people, did they read it? Students these days, they're not going to read a lot of copy, especially if it's really, really long. They're going to skip over it and go to the next page. And that's kind of sad because that's your hard work that no one's appreciating. So let's change that. Let's shorten our theme copy, right? And let's make it really dynamic. It needs to be dynamic. It needs to be concise. Every word should count. And then, if you feel like length is really necessary, okay. But then maybe just pop out some words, make them bolder, make them maybe a little different font, maybe put them in a color, really make them stand out and grab people's attention. So let's look at some themes. So here is Claudia Taylor Johnson High School from this year, and their theme is this book is supposed to be blue because of course their school colors have blue, and the book cover is red. So they went with this whole dynamic feel that, things are not going to go as you expect. And of course, as we found out in the spring, things did not go as we suspected. And this theme copy plays into that, even though it was actually written in December. And it has so many specifics to their school, and then yet it also connects to what happened in spring. So let's read along and see what you think. When does anything ever go the way it's supposed to? What we might have wanted just wasn't to be, and that's okay. There were 180 school days, but it felt more like 80. Those classes we thought would best us, turns out we were better. There was a new fence out back and a new Las Palapas across the street. So we had to choose between Palapas or Balitos, all before the bell rang, and that fence locked us out. That fence was a big deal this year for them. A hiccup doesn't always mean we'll choke. It can be the fresh breath we never knew we needed. And plus, the way things are supposed to be can be boring anyway. Great theme copy, really pulls you into the spread, very well designed, good job. Foster High School, their theme this year was if you know, you know. And this theme copy, I think, connects to everything that I'm saying you need to do. It's concise, it's dynamic, and it has specifics. So they did 2 spreads, and I'm going to read you this copy. If you know, the Bellaterra Whataburger is the place to be after football games, and Mr. Herbst gives you a high five even if you're not in his class anymore. Or you've pushed your way through the hall during a mini pep and struggled to make the 8:15 bell when 3:59 is always a parking lot. Then you know. When Coach Max is down, you say state, and when he says up, you say champs. Or that you took the senior panoramic picture wearing a meme day costume, and that Pride of Richmond, Texas advanced to the state marching contest with their show Equine. Then you know who we are. Great, incredible theme copy that really connects to their school, to their year, to this theme, and it's all done concisely and beautifully. All right, tip number 2. And this kind of goes to what I was just talking about, this specific theme copy. We want you to write specific theme copy. Very important to be specific. I want you to go back, I challenge you to go back and look at last year's book and ask yourself 2 questions. Could this theme copy be any year at our school? Could this theme copy be any school? And if the answer to either of those questions is yes, then it's probably not very good theme copy. We need to avoid those generic, ambiguous statements. And you know what? I've been there. My kids and my staffs have written theme copy that was very generic. That was, oh, we come to school and we start the year and we struggle with new schedules and changing it. And we get to homecoming and we get to Christmas and we get to our spring semester and we're excited to wrap up. And it just, that could have been any year. So we need to be specific. Avoid that generic, ambiguous stuff. We should be concise and specific. And so when we talk about that, that means the writing needs to be original. That means the writing needs to be creative, and it needs to be dynamic. You're going to hear me say dynamic a lot. It's got to include real moments from the school year, individual moments and collective moments that everyone can connect to. The truth of your story is in the details, and the info you write in that theme copy, that supports your overall theme. So we're going to look at some examples. And so this is Vista Ridge High School from 2015. I know some of y'all are going, Kel, are you really showing me a book from 5 years ago? Yeah, I kind of am. And that's because I think that this is the best example of a theme I've ever seen. In 2015, Vista Ridge High School did Hello, Goodbye as their theme. And I think that that is an ideal theme because isn't that the cycle of a school year? You start the year, everyone says hello, you go to your new classes, you start going through the year, homecoming, Christmas, you go to spring semester, you go through things happen in the spring, prom, graduation, and you say goodbye and you're done. And then the cycle starts all over again. So to me, Hello, Goodbye is this fabulous idea for a yearbook theme. And this theme copy is done so well that I think it holds up to this day, and I want you guys to see it because it hits on all these things I'm talking about: concise, specific, and dynamic. And so there are 2 spreads, and so I'm going to read you this theme copy. And I want you to listen to the language that's used and the way it's written. Hey there, it's been a while, and we have a lot to catch up on. But before we get ahead of ourselves, we got to say goodbye to a few things first. Goodbye to that precious minute of our passing periods. The new schedule had us booking it from Coach Monty's Spanish class to ceramics with Mr. G and going to the bathroom, all in a matter of 5 minutes. Goodbye, Ridgeline Ramen that came in clutch when we only had $1 to spare. And goodbye to 4A. As enrollment surpassed 2,000, we held our own with 3rd place at the state wrestling meet and 64 regional science fair projects that took sweepstakes for the 9th year. Despite the changes, we had much more to say hello to. Now that we're through our goodbyes, we can say hello. Hello, 35 minutes of daily ranger time and learning to navigate the portal, even though we were still trying to figure it out. Hello to 398,681 square feet of the new science wing that opened in February. The class of 2018 said hello to new graduation requirements under House Bill 5. 580 freshmen, our largest class ever, selected a program of study in ACE. Hello to food joints popping up all over FM 1431. It's no wonder Cedar Park is the 4th fastest growing city in the nation. So flip the page and say hello. This theme copy, I think, is ideal. They get to so many things that happened that year, and everything connects back to this theme, the hellos and the goodbyes, and it's so personal too. Look at the way they talk directly to you. And then I love that last line. So flip the page and say hello. They're inviting you in. We should all be doing that. Let's invite people into our books. Let's do a theme copy that really wants them to keep going and dig into the books. All right, here's Bridgeland High School. And so this is not an example that's 5 years old. It is an example that's a year old. But again, it's a great example of really dynamic theme copy. So Bridgeland High School in 2019 did What's Next? It was their 2nd year. Their 1st year, their theme was, all right, let's do this. And now this was their 2nd book. And so the theme copy really conveys this what next feel. And so look at what they have. They told us not to expect too much. They said it was only our 1st year. They told us to be patient, that good things take time. You know how most schools take a few years to get it together? Yeah, that's not us. We didn't just survive, we thrived. Then our 2nd year began with big hopes and big plans. We started classes on the 4th floor and filled the 50 empty classrooms. Girls cross country advanced to state and placed as the 7th best team. TSA sealed the time capsule to be opened in 50 years. Not only did we play our first varsity football game, but we beat Wall Trip 48-19. Theater performed our first musical Big Fish with an ensemble cast of 65. Pretty great for a young school, huh? So before you say we can't, remember, we've been there. We've done that. What's next? Really, really great theme copy that connects to their school, their theme, and things that happen. Really well done. And again, concise, dynamic, and look at how, they popped out some text bigger to kind of grab your attention. Very well done. And that goes to what I'm talking about next. So tip number 3, our last thing about theme copy is we need to be creative with the design. They popped out text, they made it bigger. We need to be really creative with our things. And so the way you present the information is so important. And so I'm going to challenge you again to do something different. And so I want you to abandon the conventional, abandon the normal way you've always designed theme pages, abandon the normal way that you've written theme copy. So let's see some examples. So here's Oak Grove High School from 2018. Their theme was Think Big. And I love this theme spread. Look at how simple it is. They use a black and white photo, and then the right side's got a black background, and they don't even have full sentences on this page. It's all these little phrases, and the phrases have one word bold and in a color using their pastel color palette they had in the book that year. And all those words connect back to the big theme. A giant school, oversized sweatshirts, numerous cowbells being a very thing definitive of their campus. All these things that connect to the big concept. Really well done, very different. Look at Venice High School. This is from this year, and their theme is We See Green and White. And I love this. Look at the design of this. They've got all these beautiful elements with the green boxes and the cutout photos. And then the copy is very creative as well. They have the collective experience, and then they have individual experiences, and that's really important. So the collective experience are things that everybody can connect to. So the cheerleaders decorating the first floor, the marching band playing in the courtyard, Mr. Case's physics class where they launch rockets. And maybe you've had his class, so you know what they're talking about. Or maybe you've heard of it, or you're looking forward to it because almost everyone has heard about these rockets. So really great job from Venice, giving this individual and collective experience and beautiful, layout to really pull us in to read. You want to read all the copy. Very well done. Okay, here's Episcopal School of Dallas, and their theme was In Addition To. And so you've got this great opening that doesn't look like anything you've probably seen before. There's very little copy on the page, but yet it connects so well to this theme. In addition to, if you're going to do a theme that has to do with numbers, you better have numbers in your book. And so they have chosen to use really elegant numbers, a very beautiful modern serif, and they are big. They are grabbing your attention. Really, really well done and very, very creative. All right, we are done talking about theme copy. We're moving on to writing stories and captions. And so tip number 4 is follow journalistic story formula. And so we really want you to follow a formula. I get kind of sad again when I look at books and I see stories that don't have a lot of quotes, and they tend to have just a lot of filler. It's almost like the student was just trying to fill the space. And so it doesn't have a lot about the year and the season and the events that happen. And that makes me sad. And if we would be willing to kind of follow the formula that newspapers use, our stories are going to get a lot better. You're going to get a lot more quotes in them. And we're going to tell more of the story of the year. So this formula can be called story formula. We also call it quote transition formula. And the idea is that it's a repeating formula of quotes and transitions. And then each of those quotes and each of those transitions are in a separate paragraph, and that's for ease of reading. And so this is a worksheet that I used to use with my students, and we should be able to have it available for you guys. And I have taken a part of it and blown it up for you because I used to liken how we write a feature story kind of like the way you write English class, because essentially you have an opening, you have a body, and you have a closing. But for story formula, the body is very different. Essentially, the body has this quote transition pattern that's happening. And I keep saying the word transition. And some of you might be going, I don't know what she's talking about. What's a transition? A transition is a non-quote paragraph that moves you from one part of the story to the next. So it might be providing facts. It might be paraphrasing a quote. But essentially, it's getting you from one point of the story to the next. It's sharing some information to move you smoothly from one part to the next part of the story. And so I've got an example from you. This is Cedar Park High School from a couple years ago. This is the homecoming story. And this hits on the story formula. So it's got the lead. It's got that first sentence to kind of pull you in, to kind of bring you into the story. And then it has the nut graph. And so if you're not familiar with a nut graph is the crux of the story. It's what the story is about. In English terms, it's the thesis statement. But we don't start with it because that's kind of boring. You know, that summary statement's not going to get people to read. But you need it to tell people what the story's about. And for us, the nut graph could go after the lead, or it could go after the first quote. And then the rest just follows the formula. You got a quote, and then a transition, and then a quote, and then a transition, and then a quote, and then a transition, and then the final quote that closes out the story. And every transition leads to the next quote. And every quote kind of expands on what that transition had. So this is really great. This is letting you get a ton of students in your book. It's very easy to read, and it just makes it so much of a better story. So you're getting real, authentic coverage in your book. So as you're doing the story formula, some things that will help you as you're doing your interviews, you want to think about the quotes as the heart of your story. That's the opinions, the reflections, the reactions, the emotions, the thoughts. They really make or break your story. And then all the transitions are going to relay the facts. They're going to give you the information. They're going to paraphrase the quotes that you didn't get the whole quote down, or it's not going to be a great quote. And then you're attributing it to the person you interviewed. And you want to put each of these quotes and each of these transitions in a separate paragraph. It just makes it much easier to read. And then, of course, I kind of recommend that we try to end with a really strong quote. I know sometimes people do conclusions that have kind of a factual statement, and I'm not a big fan of that because I think that tends to interject opinion into stories. I do prefer you to end with a really strong quote. I like leaving the reader with like a warm, soft, fuzzy feeling, kind of like the nice ending to a song. So that's kind of my preference. You don't have to do it. I just think that it works really well to do it. And that kind of leads into tip number 5. So I said, I worry sometimes at the end of stories that, sometimes people will interject opinion, and we don't want to put opinion in our stories and our captions. So this is tip number 5. And so here's the truth. Our job is to report the story of the year. Our job is not to be a cheerleader. And I know that's really hard because we tend to be on the sidelines of games and we're cheering on our athletes. But for the yearbook, that's not our job. Our job is to report the story. And so we need to avoid putting opinions into captions, into body copy, into stories, especially in those transitions and in those conclusions and in those first and second sentences of our captions. We're the objective reporters. We're the fly on the wall. We're relaying the story for history. So we're giving the historical perspective. So that shouldn't include our personal opinions. And if there is something that somebody says or something that you feel really strongly about, maybe the football team tried really, really hard. Maybe they did work really hard, or maybe it was a really tough battle. Let a player say that. Let the people you interview give those opinions. Let their opinions be the quotes instead of you putting your opinion. So let's look at some examples. So this is from a couple years ago from Oak Grove High School. And, the advisor who was there at the time, she had brought her staff to Intensity, which is their big fall workshop. And we had, started a really good relationship. And so she started sending me pages to critique. And we had talked about that, they had come so far. I mean, this book had changed so dramatically. It was incredible. They had improved the writing and the design and the photography and the content, and it was beautiful. But the writing did still need a little bit of work. They were struggling a little bit. And so, they wanted, attention to that. And so we looked at stuff. And so here's a great example of, this is the powder puff spread. And what they happened to do is, because they had always been doing it, is they were putting opinion into captions, into stories. And so we were slowly trying to move away from that. And so this is a great example. So there's a story on here that I'm going to show you. And we'll talk about the story a little bit. So here's the original story. Powder puff is one of the most favorite activities students can get involved in at school. Girls get a chance to not only show their more competitive side, but bond with one another over practices, pregame cheers, and anger. After a rough battle, the juniors took the W with a score of 12-0. Through every play on the field, each player showed great sportsmanship, even if they did not follow every single rule. My favorite part was when Taylor Slay was leading us out onto the field for a play and he tripped and fell, said senior Lacey Arno. I would have preferred the outcome to be different, but all in all, I had fun. Okay, so lots of opinion stuck into this story. So starting out with, the lead, Powder Puff is one of the most favorite activities. And so something I said to them, and I used to say to my students all the time was, says who? And I know that might sound harsh, but we don't decide the opinion for our entire student body. That's your perspective because the people around you, you believe it. But that doesn't mean that every person in your school believes it. And unless you're going to poll your whole school, you really can't say this. So we need to get rid of that, right? And then, of course, in that second sentence, we have, they bonded over practices, pregame cheers, and anger. Anger, where did anger come from? And then, they showed great sportsmanship. And again, this is that rah-rah, cheerleader thing that we should avoid doing. So we need to mix it up. And I'm going to flip back to the spread because I want you to see, wrong way. I think that there's a story to tell. The lead, right now that lead, Powder Puff is one of the most favorite activities. It's also a summary lead. It's not going to make people want to read this story. Summary leads just don't grab you. So we need a lead that's more descriptive, that's going to grab us. Well, if we look at what they're wearing, I think we can get a lead out of it. Look, they're in pink and green. The girls have hair bows. They even have the black eye makeup on. That's a lead for you. So what we've done is we've changed up the story. So look at the story now. Clad in pink and green shirts, bows, and eye black, the juniors face the seniors in the annual Powder Puff game. It was fun to have a rivalry against the seniors for once, Taylor Strange said. Even though I'm friends with several seniors outside of the game, we were enemies on the field. Okay, now that's a great quote. After a rough battle, the juniors took the W with a score of 12-0. Varsity football players coached the teams while 12 guys took on the cheerleader role. My favorite part was when Taylor Slay was leading us out on the field for a play and he tripped and fell, said senior Lacey Arno. I would have preferred the outcome to be different, but all in all, I had fun. So we kept the final quote, which is, I think, a nice wrapping up, but we've done some different things. Now, the lead has a much more descriptive lead. We've got details, clad in pink and green, not wearing pink and green, clad in pink and green. And then we have bows and eye black. And then the juniors faced the seniors, not played the seniors. And then we have a quote. So now we've added one more person into the story. And, we kept the rough battle. You could argue, maybe you should take that out. But look at the detail we've added. Football players helped coach. Guys played cheerleaders. That's information we didn't have before. And that's really great. So what we've done is we've taken the opinion out. We've put facts in. And we put another quote in, so we're getting more students in the book. So this is much more authentic, much stronger story. All right, moving on. Number 6, have hearty, substantial quotes. So let's get chunky. Never in your life are you gonna say that other than this. Let's get chunky. And I attribute this to Vista Ridge's Jamie Ray's, where I got this word from. When we're talking about quotes, they should be chunky. They should be hearty. They should be full of authentic and substantial information. You really want to strive for 2 or more sentences. And you want to avoid asking generic questions that aren't going to provide you real connections to the year and what happened. I think too often we ask a very generic question that really doesn't connect to the season, to how it went. We're relying on stuff. So we need to focus more on how and why questions to get more details and more emotions from people. So when you're doing your interviews, you're going to go and ask a bunch of questions. And then when you get done, you should come back and you should look at everything you got. And everything that's factual, you're not going to quote. You're going to save that for your transitions and for your first and second sentences, your captions. But everything that's an emotion and an opinion, a reaction, those are going to be your quotes. And again, remember, those are the heart of your story. And then when you are doing interviews, if you're doing interviews for a module, a secondary coverage package that is kind of like cutouts and quotes or mugs and quotes, I want you to try asking questions in a different way. So maybe it's one topic, but you ask each person the question slightly differently. And that's going to help you get some variation answers, because what you don't want is you don't want 7 quotes in a row that say, my favorite game was, my favorite game was, my favorite game was, right? So we want to mix it up. So here's an example from Vista Ridge High School from a couple years ago. This is their school spirit spread. And at the bottom, there is this mod that has 10 people in it. Guys, if you're ever looking to squeeze people in your book, this is a great example. It has 10 students that were involved in the leadership aspect of their pep rallies. And so they asked each of the students a slightly different question to make sure that their answers were all different. And so you've got, the guy that's very self-aware. Yeah, you got one favorite moment, but it's the only one that says that. You have somebody talking about being an MC. You have the girl who's excited to be the MC and to follow in the footsteps. You have a student that's really nervous. And then you have one talking about the pressure of it. So every single answer is slightly different. And this is because we're asking slightly different questions. Really good job to get quotes that are substantial and hearty and chunky. Here's another great example. This is Hardin Valley from 2019. And this is a science spread. And instead of a traditional story, they've done something called alternative copy. I love alternative copy. Alternative copy is essentially an alternative to a traditional story. So you're replacing the story and you're putting something else in. It could be highlights, it could be quotes, it could be mugs and quotes, it could be mini stories. There's lots of options, but this is a great way to tell the story. And I love this example because you're getting real authentic quotes from students about their science classes. And so you've got 4 students talking about their classes and they're just so funny. The first one from Peyton talks about they were learning about bonding. And so the teacher paired them up with someone else. And so it was a date and they had to hold hands. And so it was really, really awkward. And that's great. It's a great moment. And then Emma Kate talks about her class. I'm going to read you hers. One day Mr. Dickert made our class watch ice melt for 20 minutes. Every 30 seconds we had to record the temperature of the ice. We all got bored pretty fast. So we started playing music that had to do with ice. Then Mr. Dickert said, "What are you going to do play next? Taylor Swift?" So of course we played Taylor Swift and basically the whole class was singing and we had the flashlights on our phones out. This is awesome. Okay, so it's not so much about the ice melting the project, right? But it's this great moment from the class that I love and nobody else knew about it, but this class is fabulous. Look at Marshall's quote. Marshall's is pretty funny too. Mrs. Bush gives us options when we're late. We can either get written up or we can wear a toddler Halloween costume during class. So one day before she got to class, I put the costume on to see how long it would take her to notice. When she finally noticed, I asked her if I could use it for Halloween, and she said yes. I wore it for Halloween and returned it to her afterwards. Again, not so much about the chemistry class, but again, this fabulous, hilarious moment that nobody but that class knew about. Really funny moment. And these are those authentic quotes that you want in your book. So we're diving into these great stories. Okay, tip number 7, we need to correctly format all these quotes. So we're talking about quotes and we really want to style it right. And so there's a couple of things that will help you. So if you follow a journalistic and grammatical style, your quotes are going to be so much stronger because they're going to be, paired correctly. And so one thing is that we want to put attribution in the right place. And so attribution is who said it. And that should go after the first sentence of the quote, not before the quote, not at the very end, right after the first sentence. And that's because you're trying to introduce the person as soon as possible. But their name and said is not more important than what they said. So after the first sentence, and I'm going to show you an example in just a second. Another thing is that you should only use said, and I'm going to go through this a little more in detail in just a sec. And then the other thing that's my big pet peeve is that said should go after the name, not before. And we're going to talk about that more in more detail. So let's look at a quote fully so you can see it. So here's a quote that I just, I made up a couple years ago to show my students as an example of the format. So every game gets me so pumped up. Junior Ray Sanchez said, I try to calm myself down and just do the best I can. And that's how we win most games. So the quote starts with an open quote mark. Notice that there is not a space between the quote mark and the first word. And then of course we have that first sentence. And then we have a comma, and that's really important to note. There's a comma at the end of that sentence because technically it's not the end of the sentence. It's the end of the first sentence of the quote, but it's not the end of the sentence because we still have who said it, okay? So that's important. Then we have that attribution. So it's the title, whether it's the grade, and then the name, and then the said. Now you may do your titles differently. Some people use parentheses, some people just put, they use like a little footnote, that's fine. But these are just how you have it, the name and then the said. And then, we have the period, because that is the official at the end of that sentence. We have one space, and then the open quote mark, and then we start into that second sentence. And then we wrap it up with a period and that closing quote. So that's kind of how that all gets stylized. So let's go into some of the things I said I was going to go into a little more depth. Only use said, not says, not reply, not laughed, not said with a smile. Don't interject yourself into the story, and don't add that opinion that doesn't need to be there. Research actually shows that said is the best to use because it's the least distracting. And what do you want people to look at anyway? Do you want people to look at the word said, or look at replied or laughed? You want them to look at the actual quote. I want them to look at the actual quote. So just use said. And when we do use said, we need to put it after the name, because verbs go after nouns. When I would explain this to my students, I would say, you know, you wouldn't say walked lemons or talked lemons. So why would you say said lemons? And that usually helped them understand. So verbs go after nouns. And then if they still have a problem, you can do the funny, you know, we don't speak like Yoda. So, okay, number 8. Let's write substantial captions. So don't shortchange your captions, because really and truly, they're the most read part of your yearbook. And so they need to have real information in them. Names, locations, facts, statistics, all kinds of information to give people. Strive as much as you can for multiple sentences. I know you can't always do that, but wherever you can, really strive. If it's a big photo, it probably needs a real caption. And then don't forget the power of a really great quote. So when you are writing these captions, you really want to ID everyone. I so often see books that don't have pictures ID'd, and this makes me really, really sad. Even if you're only able to do an ident. An ident is just a short identification, you know, name and grade. You gotta ID people, and you know, 5-10 years, you're not gonna remember who those people are. So the kind of the rule of thumb is, you know, first and last name and the grade, or if they have a title. And then you need to ID in pictures. If there's 5 or less people, you need to ID every single person. If there are 5 or more, you can ID them as a group. So you could say the seniors, or the dance team members, or the varsity football team, or the golf team. But I would recommend that you still index everyone. So you still might type all the names in, index them, and then maybe hide it behind the picture. I think that's important. People want to know they're in the book, and sometimes it's hard to get everybody in. And those big pictures really help you get people in. But if you don't index it, people don't know. And yes, it's a pain. Yes, it takes time, but I recommend doing it. I used to do it with my students. We would put the picture up on the big screen. And I would actually, even if we didn't know who everybody was, I would show my freshman classes and my other classes and really get help IDing as many as I could, because I wanted to index as many people as possible. All right, so when you are writing these captions, there's a formula you can use to help you. And so it's this ABCD formula. And so A is action lead-in, B is basic information, C is complementary information, and D is direct quote. So what is this? A, action lead-in. That's that attention-getting phrase. 2 or 3 words to kind of pull you into the caption. It's going to link the photo to the caption. I tend to call these caption headlines. Action lead-in is what we call it here officially. B, basic information. This is telling you who and what's happening, possibly when and where. This is your first sentence of your caption. C, complementary information. This is the second sentence. This is giving additional information, a fact or a stat or some kind of extra detail that we don't know already. And then D is direct quote. This is a quote reflecting on the photo, or maybe it's reflecting on that second sentence. So A, B, C, D, really well. So we're gonna see that in action. So here's a picture from Canyon Vista Middle School, balancing act in Jennifer Sweet's 4th period. Christiana Arnett, Ellen Cho, and Alexia Riley stacked cup towers. They had to make the tower as tall as possible with limited popsicle sticks and cups. It was really interesting because I got to bond with the people in my class that I've never had class with before, Arnett said. So they had this ABCD formula. So action lead in, there's that balancing act, that's that phrase to grab us. And then we have the basic info in the first sentence. We know what class it is, we know what period it is, we know who's in the picture, and we know what they're doing. Complementary detail, this is the second sentence. Find out information about what they were doing and what they were using. And then D, that direct quote. We have one quote from one of the students in there. All right, you have gotten to the last tip. Tip number 9, offer authentic coverage. So let's get real. You want to focus on the real moments from the year, especially with clubs and sports. I kind of have heartbreak a lot of times when I look at spreads, especially sports spreads, and there's nothing about the season. And it just makes me sad. I think it's really important to have that substantial information. I don't think you need a lot of like, why do they like the sport or why are they involved? Yeah, maybe you could do that a little bit, but more than that, I want to know about what game was challenging. What game did they not expect to win? How did the season go? Were they sad when it ended? Were they ecstatic to win games they didn't expect to win? I just think there's so much story to tell that we haven't been telling. And, something to remind you guys about is we're really the only history of the year. Your local paper covers a little bit of your school, but not every moment. And if your school has a newspaper, they'll definitely cover things, but it's not permanent. That paper tends to go away. Your book, that book is permanent. It's in your hands, and it's going to be here for 5, 10, 50, 100 years. So we need to preserve that history. So important that we record the real things that happened during the year. So great example from 2018. This is St. Thomas Episcopal School, and I love the story that's on the cross-country spread. And this is one of those examples of the story where the reporter breaks the rules because she puts herself in the story. We wouldn't normally do that, but it works so well. And I'm going to read you the story because it's one of my favorites. So women's cross-country start late at state. Miranda Graves, 2018, scanned her camera across the 114 high schoolers lined up for the start of the TAPS for a women's cross-country championship race. Where were the STE girls? She scanned across the start line again. They were not there. The gun went off. The girls were still not there. Is this the right race? She asked. She turned around again. The girls were sprinting to the starting line. Some still had jackets and sweatpants on. We were actually cheering on the boys when our race started. The team and I had no idea that our race was going on until my parents came and told us, Kate grimly said. The late start meant that they were a minute and a half behind. Despite that, Reese McDormand managed to catch up and finish 12th overall. I personally thought it was the perfect end to our season, America Con Sanchez said. I remember Jen and I were running and laughing, and then we saw Ramsey in his USA shorts that we got him. We were all running in our sweatpants. And I don't know how many weird looks we got, but it was just so funny. I think that if we hadn't started late, then we wouldn't have run as fast as we did. It pretty much summed up how our season went. Meanwhile, the boys finished 4th overall. Joel Hearns at 20 and Mitchell Harrington 18, who led the team, finished 21st and 24th out of 156 runners. So this is great. This is this incredible moment from the year that was so part of their season that no one would have known if the reporter hadn't told the story. This is true, authentic coverage. Here's another one, the same kind of really authentic coverage. This is Foster High School from this past year. And I love this spread and I love this story. And so the background is, of course, you all know that spring seasons were cut short. And so teams like this didn't get to finish their seasons. But what you don't know is that Foster, one of their players passed away. And so this game, which was the very first game, they had to play 2 days after he died. And so I want to read this story to you. More than just a game, varsity wins emotional district home opener. Fans wearing white filled the stands. Balloons and signs lined the fences for the district home opener against Lamar. But it was so much more than the first game at home. A number 7 jersey hung in the dugout to honor junior Sam Brown, their teammate who passed away 2 days earlier. Going into the game, we tried to prepare as if it was any other game, senior Walker Ashley said. Once the first pitch was thrown, our intensity was just different. Senior Christian Martinez, sophomore Samuel Hardcastle, junior Luke Capel, and senior Brian Harrell scored runs in the first inning. Knowing the pitcher couldn't throw a curveball for a strike was a big advantage while hitting, Capel said. Energy and focus overtook the team, and each time senior Chase Albright took the mound, they were on their feet shouting, "Cheer!" from the dugout. We were laser focused and knew we needed to do whatever it took to win, Ashley said. Albright pitched into the 7th, allowing only 2 hits. Lamar cut into the 5-1 lead and came back, scoring 4 runs to tie the game. After Lamar tied the game, the only thought that went through my head was to do your job, Ashley said. I knew if we all did our own job that we would come out victorious. After junior Brett Bermudez struck out the final Lamar batter, Harold came up and hit a single. Then, on a 2-1 pitch, Ashley hit a walk-off home run to win 7-5. The only thing I could think about was Sam, Ashley said. I just hope I was able to make him proud. This was the team's only district game due to UIL suspension of play in response to COVID-19. But for the team, it was the most meaningful game they played. I'm glad we got our chance to play for Sam, even if it was only a game, Ashley said. You see, I don't even know these kids. And I cry every time I read the story. This story has so much impact. This story is a true moment from the season. And if they hadn't written it, we wouldn't know. This is our job, to tell the stories that are the emotional stories and the authentic moments of our season, of our year. Okay, now, you don't always have to have a true story to tell the story. Sometimes you can share the story of the season or of a club or of an event with alternative copy. And this is a fantastic example of this. This is Westwood High School. This is their cross-country spread. And it's got this beautiful design. And in the place of a traditional story is this alternative copy, which we call highlights. There is a highlighted phrase and then a quote. And these are awesome. There are moments that they hit on, season highlights, favorite courses, proudest moments, greatest team memories, the most difficult race. I love that. Not just the best race, the most difficult race. So we're covering the good part of the season and the most challenging parts of the season. Favorite workouts, best practice moments, good luck charms. These are all amazing stories that we wouldn't have known if they hadn't done this. And then also, look at how many students this is that you're squeezing into the book. So, these are all extra kids in the book that maybe a story might have only gotten 2 or 3 people. Well, now you've got like 7 people. This is awesome. So we're getting real authentic moments. We know how the season went. And even before that, if you look at the bottom of the spread, there's even a state qualifier. So we even have the final ending of the season included. Really, really well done. All right, last one. This is Inglemoor. And Inglemoor, I think, is probably one of the best I've seen of the schools, of how they cover their spring sports. With, it was really tough when seasons didn't end well, when they didn't get to finish their seasons, and they didn't have a lot of photos. And I think Inglemoor just did a phenomenal job of covering all their spring sports. And so this is their golf spread. And so, they only had 3 photos to work with, right? And so what they did was they interviewed their female golfers, and they got, cutouts of them. And yeah, they're not in their golf uniforms. And you know what? I'm okay with that. Maybe those tops are, but obviously the girl in the black dress and the skirt, she's not. And I think that's fine. But look at the quotes. At first I was really hopeful. I was very sad. And then look at Alyssa's quote. I feel angry. I'm definitely sad and heartbroken. I played all 4 years and I was really excited for my senior season. But obviously that's not happening. These are real moments and real emotions and authentic parts of the year for these students. These are the stories that we need to tell in our books. So as we wrap up, and all these tips that I've given you, I hope that they will, make you really, really think about the writing you're doing and to not overlook that writing aspect of your yearbooks. Because I think that writing is so important. It's an integral part of our books. The writing in our books needs to be substantial, it needs to be authentic, it needs to be journalistic, and it needs to connect to the year. I hope that I have inspired you to take your writing to the next level. If you have any questions, this is all my contact info to catch me. Yes, my phone number is up there because students and advisors do text me spreads. Don't text me in the middle of the night. But if you need help during the day, I am here for you. Really hope you guys are excited about this year. And I really hope that this writing show gets you going on writing. We do have some time to chat. So if you have questions, let's get to it.